Hello, my name is Elena Cherepanov. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I want to welcome you today to my webinar on psychological first aid, a crash course for advanced mental health professionals. And for the past 3 weeks, I've been working and with the terrible, horrible humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in Ukraine right now. And I've been providing remotely direct services, and also I was supervising and training mental health professionals and also paraprofessionals so they would be able to assist. So, and that's how this idea of this webinar came about. And throughout my work, I realized that this war in Ukraine has created the overwhelming mental health needs. And there are also a lot of resources. However, not all psychologists and other mental health professionals, even those who consider themselves a trauma specialist, not everyone is trained in psychological first aid. And this comparatively basic model, which is a model of choice during the emergency and complex situation, is kind of, has been used for a very long time. And that's what I'm trying to offer you today. So this module is going to take about an hour, maybe a little bit more or less. And here I'm going to discuss only the core components of this psychological first aid, something that I strongly believe mental health professionals who want to help should be aware of that. So this war in Ukraine has invoked a great wave of compassion and outpouring support from all walks of life. So that is why it is also important for me to make sure that we all who want to help are on the same page and provide trauma-informed care, regardless of what kind of approaches in therapy we've been trained in. So let me share screen. So this is what it looks like. And it's a crash course because it's going to be very brief and to the point. And here I explain why psychological first aid is a method of choice during complex emergency and disaster mental health. This module was developed by the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, and it happened back in 2006. And since then, a lot of major humanitarian agencies have been using it, including International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Doctors Without Borders, and also World Health Organization developed special modules, and American Psychological Association also endorsed it. Why do I believe that I'm qualified to talk about that? So I teach at the Graduate School of Psychology and Counseling at Cambridge College in Boston. My primary expertise is in global mental health, multicultural integrated care, systems of trauma, and response to humanitarian emergencies. And I've been doing this work for the past 20 years, and I worked in different places with different organizations. I provided direct care. I also provided programming and worked as independent expert consultant. And in addition, I'm the author of over 60 papers and books, and the most recent and most relevant are Understanding the Transgenerational Legacy of Totalitarian Regimes, where I describe the long-lasting consequences of the situation when government abuses power and control. And previous one was on ethics for global mental health, from good intentions to humanitarian accountability, where I've been examining all very complex ethical dilemmas that emerge when we provide this line of work. And I was trying to demonstrate that good intentions are not enough to provide responsive care when there are so many vulnerable people. Now, what do I understand under advanced mental health professionals? Those are professionals who have a formal education in mental health, such as psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, social workers, psychiatric nurse practitioners. It kind of becomes a little tricky, this definition, because the requirements for licensing can differ in different countries, and the required set of skills as well. So, but I do expect that those who receive this formal training, they are aware of dealing with trauma and know the basics of crisis intervention. Those are professionals who know the difference from between acute stress reactions and trauma, and have skills in active listening and diffusing and working with severely depressed and distressed persons. These professionals are those who have experiences of providing mental health services to culturally and economically diverse populations. Very important, those are those who know limits of their competency and seek additional training and supervision if needed. And of course, professionals are those who understand the importance of self-care and peer support. Here are the references of materials that I used in developing this presentation. The first is Psychological First Aid Field Organizations Guide. It's available at the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. It's a wonderful module, wonderful book that has also a lot of very practical recommendations. For example, how to deal when child cannot sleep, or how to help a person who isolates. Next is IS guidelines on mental health and psychosocial support in emergency settings. This paradigm became a golden standard for everyone who is involved in global mental health and humanitarian emergencies. And the last is Psychological First Aid Facilitators Manual for Orienting Field Workers that was developed by World Health Organization, War Trauma Foundation, and World Vision International. So all these books are extremely important, and I kind of inserted my own work, recent work there, on mental health interventions in complex political contexts. I define this context as a setting affected by complex political dynamics, violence, social instability, resulting in gross violation of human rights and massive trauma. And another characteristic of such settings is that it is not sometimes safe to provide psychological aid, but also it is not safe both for providers and also for those who are being supported. So it creates additional considerations that we need to keep in mind when we develop programming. So what are we going to cover in training? I'm going to go very quickly over why do we use psychological first aid, who uses that, when, how, and what. And we will talk briefly about the framework, concepts, and practice. We will review action principles, prepare, look, listen, and link. We will talk about providers, resources, and supports, obviously who needs special attention. We will talk about sources of resilience, and also when interventions are culturally appropriate and how can we ensure that. And then we will touch base about general principles of responding to humanitarian emergency. And we will end up with talking about self-awareness, self-care, and fantasies. Obviously, I will not be able to talk in details about everything, so feel free. There is a lot of written on slides. You can definitely use snipping tool and then review them in more details. So I'm just going to glance over. So the general idea behind psychological first aid is that the evidence shows that people generally do better over the long term if they feel safe, connected to others, and emotionally stable, when they are aware of the sources of their resilience and strength, when they have access to social, physical, and emotional support, Remember this statement that a person can cope with almost anything if they have good supports. And also, it is important that if the person is able to regain a sense of control by being able to help themselves and others, it's also very good factor in terms of recovery. So, psychological first aid is a provision of basic psychological care in the short-term aftermath of a traumatic event. At the next steps or phases of the responding to the traumatic event, there are going to be different tasks, different goals, different frameworks used, and different skills are needed. So now we are focusing only on the immediate or short-term aftermath. And also because a large-scale emergency overwhelms existing mental health response resources as well as community resources to cope, psychological first aid is an important skill for any public health workers like nurses, teachers, and anyone who works with others. And psychological first aid does not require professional mental health education. It does different tools in terms of risk assessment, risk management. At the same time, very often the trainings and the supervision is expected to be provided by trained mental health professionals. Also, we can use psychological first aid and apply to any public health settings, the workplace, the military, mass disaster venues, accidents, robberies, suicide, instances of suicide, homicide, or community violence. So these skills are really have very wide applications. So psychological first aid is basically comforting someone who is in distress, helping them feel safe and calm. So even if a person feels better for a short time after we work with this person, it's already a good outcome. However, in addition, while doing that, we are trying to assess immediate needs and concerns, assess risks, trying to protect person from further harm. We also trying to stabilize persons emotionally. We are helping to address immediate basic needs and access information, services, and social supports. And also, very important, we are helping people to gain skills to reduce the ongoing distress, but also to effectively cope with the post-disaster and future stresses and adversities. So this is very important. Psychological first aid is not professional counseling or therapy. We are not encouraging a detailed discussion of the event that has caused the distress. It's not about that. It's about coping with what comes right now. We are not asking to analyze what has happened and what kind of feelings it invoked. It does not belong to this module, to this phase, to the reaction to the trauma or traumatizing event or highly stressful event. We are not going to press someone for details on what happened, unless, of course, person wants to talk about that, and then we are there to listen. So we also are not going to pressure people to share their feelings unless they want to. We are not going to solve all the problems, only the most pressing ones, and we are not trying to make people happy. We are just trying to help them to pull through and feel better for some time until they will be able to gain enough strength. So next couple of slides are going to be about the framework for PFA. So here is a famous IASC pyramid of psychosocial needs. And it suggests that there are at least 4 levels of psychosocial needs and cares. And on the basic layer, on the first layer, we see basic services and security. And it's understandable if the person is starving, if they have no roof over their head, if they are at risk, our psychological interventions might have very, very limited effectiveness. So that's something that we are trying to attend first. So the next level, it's actually the level where psychological first aid supposed to belong. It suggests that there will be many people who may suffer from moderate to severe psychological distress, but they also are those who can be assisted by community and family supports. So on this level, PFA goals would be to identify community resources and resiliences, train community leaders, and encourage them to support each other as much as possible. So, and then the role of the PFA responder would be to connect the person with available resources and community supports. That being said, not everyone will be, not for everyone is going to be sufficient. Some people may need focused non-specialized supports. According to IASC pyramid, it says that from 15 to 20% of people may suffer from kind of higher level of distress that can be compared to mental disorder. In my experience, we might expect much higher numbers. So what does it mean, this focused non-specialized supports? So those people who can best be served by peers. It could be support groups. It could be, for example, people who are trained in providing counseling for trauma symptoms, for sleep problems, and many other things. And here already we do expect that providers are being trained in in the response and what they're dealing with. And only, according to this pyramid, only a small percentage of people who who were exposed to this terrible humanitarian catastrophe will require specialized services, which include psychiatric services and also psychotherapy. But we will know about that very likely much later in terms of how many will need it. But those people are those who are not coping when the peers, even the trained peers, are not able to help them, and community, it's too much for community to handle. So that's first place. By the way, in terms of the layer 2 of community and family supports, Israel Trauma Coalition Network has developed a wonderful model of fostering community resilience to to catastrophic events. What they do, they identify community leaders, they train them in terms of how identify the needs, who need help, how to support them. And they went even further more. They also trained school children, so they know when someone needs help or someone displays certain kind of behaviors that can indicate higher risks. They also know when to refer further on because they understand the limits of this intervention. So that's another way to describe the place of PFA. I look at that as a form of prevention. We do have primary preventions, which are strategies to avoid the development of the disease. Similarly, in medical model, it could be vaccination. Here, we are talking about psychoeducation. Um, uh, for example, spreading this information, the booklets that you can expect such and such symptoms. This is the best way to cope with them. If it's becoming too much, or someone reports feeling suicidal, or you're not coping, so then this is what you have to do, and that's where you need to call. So environmental interventions are very important also because to cope, people need, safe place, a roof over their head, and some healthy food. It could be also, for example, organizing like sports activities for children, or having special playground where they can feel safe and interact. So secondary prevention, and that's where we play psychological first aid, are forms of crisis intervention. So psychological first aid is not only one module, there is also disaster mental health and critical incident stress debriefing, meaning mostly it's modifications. So, and tertiary prevention it's already the only prevention, only level of care when we provide treatments. And here we are talking about brief therapies like EMDR or other therapies of your choice. It could be counseling, and it could be also psychotherapy. Here's what's important. So crisis intervention and treatment have different agenda. They have different goals. They're using different tools. So furthermore, the tools of crisis intervention, it's difficult to use when we provide treatment and the other way around. So here is an example, and this is a metaphor that I often use. Just imagine that there is a closet and the child, for example, threw into this closet full of clothes, some kind of, smoke pellets. And it could happen. So then our role would be to hold these doors from the outside until all this internal pressure subsides. Because if this closet explodes, if you open doors too quickly, so then all this, smoke can spill over the whole house. When we do therapy, though, our goal is the opposite. First of all, we assume that this tension, immediate tension, is manageable. So then we are able to open the doors without fearing of the explosion. Then we take the clothes out, we review them, we air them, we throw away what has been damaged irreversibly. The rest we kind of, maybe wash, hold them and put them back. So, and you understand probably that it cannot be done at the same time. So when we provide crisis intervention, our role is basically to tell the person, whatever you are doing great. So that's a module that uses unconditional support, because the person already is such a fragile state and is struggling so much that that's what we need for the person to regain back strength. When we provide treatment, though, we are using kind of, the approach that can be summarized in this message: you can do better. You are doing okay, but you can do better. So we cannot tell the same person that, whatever you are doing is great, but you can do better. So there is a certain contradiction. That is why it is usually a very good idea to have some time between when we provide crisis intervention and when we start doing therapy, to allow a person to try to use their own gain skills, see what they can do. However, they also need to know that if they are not coping and their coping skills are not functional and they may create more problems, so then that would be the good time to start a treatment for trauma. I'm sure that there are more questions about that, but in a nutshell, so that's a difference. And PFA, like any other crisis intervention, has very particular assumptions that are different from therapy. So these assumptions are that people are basically strong, healthy, competent, and adaptable. We do believe that most of the people will be able to cope for better or worse. We are just trying to make it more for better. We do have trust that people are resilient and capable of change. And even those people who present extremely, crushed and devastated, we can always suggest that these people have something in them that help them to survive. We also believe that people's presenting problems do not reflect an underlying mental illness, but rather the need for outside assistance and support. That's why we are trying to avoid diagnosing persons on place. We are just trying to help with whatever presenting issues we deal with. Now, it also suggested that while many survivors will recover on their own, some will experience distressing reactions that kind of, interfere with adaptive coping, for example, drinking. In any crisis intervention modules, reality is more important than pursuing. So the present and the future, nearest future, are more important than the past, especially distant past. Person might have very difficult life, but what we are looking at how this person is coping right now. We are not engaging that distant past. For example, this person might say, "Oh, my life was terrible since the beginning, and a lot of things happened." And our response is, "Yeah, I'm really sorry about that happened. What is that going on right now, and how I can help you right now?" And in terms of future, my favorite question is to help the person with planning. Till what's going to happen till the end of the day or maybe week, but not farther on, because trauma creates very complicated relationship with the future vision, and by the way, with the hope as well. The concept of hope becomes extremely controversial there. Next, so when we respond, we are not trying to fix person, we are trying to more towards facilitating the person's coping efforts. So that's very important. We are not doing all the work. We are just trying to see what the person can do by themselves. And also assessment is done on an ongoing basis rather than assumption-oriented mental status exam. So we are not walking around asking what day it is, because probably I would be the first one who would not be able to answer this question. And also we are not asking everyone if they feel suicidal. However, if the person is, shows certain indicators, like person shares that they feel hopeless and helpless, and they endorse that they might feel like going to sleep and never wake up, or just explicitly express suicidal ideations. So then we act upon them and we try to do what we can, or we need to refer this person to the higher level of care. So and another thing that comes from crisis intervention framework is that small interventions will naturally lead to the major changes. So we don't have to go very deep into the problem and do a lot of things because all the time, because you have no idea how many times the person started feeling that they're able to manage their emotions after they had breakfast, for example. Or giving a person a bottle of water, it has much more therapeutic effects than our talking in many cases, especially this kind of stage of the response. So we should try to start with the minimum intervention because it might facilitate the natural coping process. And then another consideration from crisis intervention is that most who would benefit from this intervention typically do not self-refer. So then their family members who are educated may bring this person for the services, or we might need to do outreach, which is different from classical therapy. My apologies. Okay, so we always need to start with ourselves. We need to create an inventory of our skills, trainings, what trainings we need to get more, what kind of resources, professional and personal, and what kind of supports we have. We need to work in the team. No one can do it alone. The time of kind of lonely volunteers has gone. And later, maybe in the follow-up webinars, I will talk more about that. We need to train ourselves to think more about the presentation than about diagnosis, which sometimes is difficult for professional clinicians. And again, we are not fixing problem, but assisting survivors with finding their own solution. In addition, we are not looking for all the solutions. We are looking to the solutions to only the most pressing issues. And of course, all interventions must be trauma-informed and culturally competent. So we all are coming from different approaches and trained in them, and that's perfectly all right. But when we provide this work, we need to be on the same page and do trauma-informed work. So we also need to work on resilience and supports and focusing and considering self-help, and also organizing the community to provide mutual assistance, because we will never be able to assist everyone with that. So we will need to rely on the family supports, community supports, and that might be the best use of our skills. So what is a generic session process with a focus on the resilience? So first of all, it needs to be to follow this line and sequence. So we always start with the cognitive level, like asking what happened, who are you, etc., etc. Who do you have, who can help. After that, there might be emotional part when the person would vent their feelings. That's all right. We will be there to hear, to listen. But no matter how we discuss it and what we work on, we need to finish our session on a cognitive level. We are not supposed to open anything that we are not able to close by the end of the session. And final cognitive level could include anything, linking to the resources, doing psychoeducation, everything that we can consider as a kind of cognitive framework, which would bring person back to the reality from being emotionally overwhelmed. I already mentioned that orientation and risk assessment are done only when there are specific indicators, but we definitely keep our ears and eyes open. So here are some questions that I found helpful in addition to core actions. How did you manage to escape, which also indicate that they have strengths. So what is your strength? What's the sources of your resilience? What keeps you going? What helped you in the past? What are you going to do tonight? Is there anyone who you can talk to if you feel sad or upset? Do you need help to contact them or to contact their family or friends? So all these questions help to focus on resilience. Now, are we ready? So PFF providers need to have certain skills in addition to being a clinician in our situation. So they need to be able to work in chaotic and unpredictable environments, and they need to be able to collaborate and do not compete, which sometimes could be challenging for our people. We need to have capacity for rapid assessment of survivors and knowing when to ask more questions. We need to modify our trainings to providing services based on timing of the intervention, context, and culture. So there is no such a thing as a kind of, approach that is good for everything always. We need to be able to tolerate intense distress and reactions. We must be able to accept tasks that are not only psychological or mental health. We take whatever comes our way, and we get our hands dirty, and we get involved into providing food if it comes to that point. So we are not saying, oh, I'm a psychologist, I don't do these things, I'm just, So it could be the case in other contexts, not then. We also need to be able to work with diverse cultures, ethnic groups, developmental levels, and the faith backgrounds. We need to have the understanding and capacity for self-care, and we need to know the systems, referral systems, and available resources and support, professional supports, where to refer this person who might need more support and more work. Now, there are 4 actions, kind of, roughly identified. Those are prepare, look, listen, and link. I'm going to go over them very quickly. So prepare includes that before entering the scene, we need to know what happened. We need to know the risks. We need to know available services and support, who provides basic needs. For example, Red Cross very often takes on responsibility for connecting people who were lost. Who else is helping there? Where the people can find housing or food. So all that refers to core action of being prepared. Now, next is look, which means paying attention to a situation. Here we are screening persons with who needs prioritized care, urgent basic needs, who are in serious distress, and also kind of, we observe emotional reactions. Now, while doing that, we need to look for the people within the affected population. First is children and adolescents, particularly those alone or separated from caregivers. It says here girls are especially at risk. I also would add boys as well, because unaccompanied children and adolescents are at high risk of abuse and exploitation. Of course, we look at persons with health conditions and disabilities, including pregnant women, blind or deaf persons, people who may be immobile, need help to get to a safe place, people with severe mental disorders, or people on medications for chronic health or mental health conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure. And there is a group of people who are traditionally at risk for discrimination or violence. Those include women of certain ethnic or people of certain ethnic racial groups and LGBTQ. So basically those who may need additional protection or extra assistance in accessing services because they might be deprived of accessing or not allowed to access services, and there might be a possible discrimination or violence against them. And of course, people who need more advanced support immediately are those people with very serious life-threatening injuries who need emergency medical care, people who are upset that they cannot care for themselves or their children. So those people can be confused or disturbed, or there might be other things kind of that happened that we have concerns about. We are clinicians, we know that. Or people who are extremely apathetic and are not pursuing kind of recommendations of where they can find services. And of course, people who may hurt themselves, but also people who may hurt others. The third core action is listen, meaning paying attention to the person. So we do, even if people are devastated and extremely distressed, we still need to be able to approach people extremely respectfully, and we need to ask persons about their needs and concerns and not to assume anything. We do need to use active listening skills, and we need to be able to help persons to feel calm. We do introduce ourselves. I will talk a little later about that. We need to pay attention to everything that is going on. We need to accept other feelings. And also, we need to be able to help the person in distress to find solutions to their immediate needs and problems. So how can we introduce ourselves? So this is actually very common question, and it's not easy. So in psychological first aid modules, there are recommendations how we can do that. And here are 2 recommendations for adults and adolescents and children. You can take it from there. For example, for adult, it might sound like that. My name is such and such. I worked with such and such. I'm checking in with people to see how they're doing and to see if I can help in any way. Is it okay if I talk to you for a few minutes? May I ask you your name, Mr. or Mrs. Before we talk? Is there anything right now that you need, like some water or juice? So that's a bare bone introduction. However, you can add more to that, obviously. The only thing that I want to tell you that the culture of the disaster response is such that we are trying to avoid introducing ourselves by doctors. So it's not that place where it is important. We do, although, need to introduce ourselves by profession. In this situation, our personal warmth and ability to be present and have personal feelings are much more important than our degrees. However, when we do advocacy, then we can already use this heavy artillery of all our degrees as much as we want. Plus, calling ourselves by doctors, it also means that the people who do not have doctors are doing an inferior job, which is not the case. So now, not going to stay on that. Those are typical distress reactions to crisis. You are welcome to review it. I suggest that everyone was trained in active listening, which is a key component of PFA. The only thing that I wanted to draw your attention to. You will, I know that we all have been trained in the idea that we should not touch our clients under any circumstances. And I understand that there are good reasons for that. However, on a disaster side, you will be surprised and to see how much touching means for the people that we work with and for each other. So of course we should ask if it is okay, if it is appropriate, but touching, gentle touch, the hand, gently touching the hand or shoulder can go very long way. And sometimes it can mean for a person more than 1,000 words. And of course, it's a matter of comfort for you and the people that we work with. I just wanted to encourage you not to disregard it from the beginning. When the person is devastated, this kind of, small touch can really mean a lot, and you will see how people respond to that. Just ask first. Check with the person. Now, calming person in distress and managing intense emotions. So I do believe that most of us know how to do that and how to diffuse situation, because you will see a lot of very intense emotions, and they would be appropriate. There would be a lot of anger. And here are some suggestions in terms of using our body language, and also in the morning solar that will remind you, how you can practice on your own, how we can kind of, sit, what kind of posture to take, how to establish eye contact and how to communicate. Please allow the person we are talking to dictate the distance between you. So now, when we are dealing with emotionally overwhelmed survivors, which can happen very often, again, we need to respect person's privacy. We can say that, I'm available if you need me. I'm going to be nearby. And is it okay if I will check with you in a few minutes? And no matter what, we are trying to remain available, calm, quiet, and present. Although we are not getting too close to the survivors, if they don't want to talk to us, we can do, some kind of paperwork nearby, so while being available. We also can help survivors to focus on manageable feelings, thoughts, and goals, something short-term goals, for example. And of course, we can offer information that helps to orient to surroundings, like where they are right now, what to expect, who is taking care of them, and what steps to consider. And we all know certain techniques that we use to stabilize emotionally overwhelmed survivors. Those are grounding techniques, breathing exercises. You are free to kind of, get more information. There are tons of them. We can provide psychoeducation, discuss the role of medications, and maybe gather information what medication they were receiving before that. We may want to tackle substance abuse issues, especially if this person has a previous history. So we don't want them to go to the withdrawal, and kind of, we also may indicate that it may be not the best way to cope. One thing I just would discourage you from asking person to relax. You can try, but you probably will have a very angry response instead. But it's not specific to this situation. Now, what we don't do, we don't force people to share their stories. We don't give simple reassurances. It would be too easy, such as everything will be all right. It may or may not. Or I know how you feel. We don't. We should not be giving any kind of, false reassurances. We should not be jumping too quickly to overcoming and finding positive side, like at least you survived. It's not really, it doesn't go well. And of course, we shouldn't be telling people what they should be feeling, thinking, or doing. We don't judge people for what they did earlier. We don't make any promises that cannot be kept. And also important, we don't criticize existing services, relief activities, or colleagues in front of people who need the services, regardless of what we think about that. And going back to what's trauma-informed care presents in this kind of setting. And the next 3 suggestions or 3 directions have been developed based on the wonderful Riverside Community Health brochure a while ago. So they identified 3 modules for trauma-informed care. First is safety, establishing safety. So, and although we cannot make people safe, we can try to minimize harm from some things like, loneliness or delayed access to medical care or loss of income as much as we can. We also can reduce unnecessary sources of toxic stress, like consider limiting exposure to social media. And we can encourage person to engage in healthy self-care activities like mindfulness, exercising, crafting, whatever works for them. And I usually pay a lot of attention to fostering a relationship, because sometimes the family members are those who will be able to provide the best support. At the same time, during the extreme stress, there might be a lot of conflicts in the family. So just if you will be able to kind of, help the people to kind of, put everything into the context and understand that no matter what they feel about each other, they're still the closest people who will be able to help. So I think it's very important. And also maybe reaching out to neighbors or community members who might be isolated. The second is predictability, reestablishing a predictability, which means we can help to maintain or encourage or build structure and routine as much as possible. We can review what are the rituals and routines that family used to do, and if there is a way to kind of reestablish it. And trying to discuss the schedule, trying to organize lives as much as possible, like developing to-do lists, setting goals, and of course using one day at a time attitude, which helps to increase the sense of predictability in their life, even when there is no predictability whatsoever. At least they know what they're going to do by the end of the day. And the third is control. So when we are helping others, it does help increase feeling of being in control. Then they can think about what skills they want to learn, maybe another language, especially if they move to a different country. Playing an instrument, even it's very difficult to focus when the people are that distressed or generally stressed out. So whatever works, whatever is going to give them a small sense of control, it's great. Another way is to realize and give yourself and your children choices and collaborate around decision making as much as possible. We always have choice, even if these choices are very limited. We can also focus on on their or family strengths, because it's always helps to increase the sense of control in life. Now, and the last is linking. So basically we provide information, linking them to the services, tackle practical problems, and trying to help person to connect with loved ones and social supports. So few general notes about organizing response. So first, what we do, we start with the needs assessments. And it's not enough just to know that people are desperately in need. We also need to realize how immediate it is. What are the resources, available resources in the community, who are the most vulnerable groups, and how to gain the access to the community. When we do programming, basically when we decide or plan what we are going to do, so there is no such a thing as we just want to help and we go places. We need to think about that ahead of time. So we need to think about overcoming fragmentation of the efforts, because if there are too many people on the site where everyone does different things and they're not connected, it does create a lot of chaos, and it actually could harm more than help. We also need to incorporate concerns about termination and sustainability. Basically, what will happen after providers leave? We cannot leave people out of services without any kind of other resources that they would be able to access. So it's not just fly in and out. It's kind of it has a lot of ethical considerations and issues that may rise out of that. when we do resource assessment, we are focusing on capacity building. The local resources, the local providers must lead the response because those are their people. They are going to stay there. They know their culture. They will guide us in developing culture-specific and culture-appropriate interventions. We can though ask them how we can help, but it is their decision. And generally, our role as outsiders is to support them and maybe collaborating with developing local referral systems and healthcare systems, and much less to provide direct care and especially taking over the coordination. Of course, it's possible when community is dispersed, so then it's really hard to do that. But even then, we need to really be extremely cognizant about our role there. We are not savers. We are coming to help. So, and another role that can be also kind of considered would be building or rebuilding the community in the refugee camps and creating mutual supports groups that also would be very resource consuming, and these groups would be able to function even after we leave. So a few considerations about the role of responders. So first of all, we should avoid thinking that we are irreplaceable and all alone responsible for rescuing everybody and can do that alone. This feeling of omnipotence is dysfunctional and can harm. We also should avoid taking unnecessary risks. Our safety is utmost. I'm not going to discuss why it's important. It's much more than just professional ethics. The safety imperative is important because it might have systemic fallout and it's going to harm victims. Also, we need to avoid creating parallel structure because it leads to more chaos than it's already there. So try to identify and link to the available structure and kind of boost their activities instead. This sense that there is nobody to help may not be an accurate perception. We need to know more and do our own research. And we need to use, as I already said, trauma-informed approaches. Personal contact is much more important than any kind of previously learned approaches, and we need to be able to adjust it, to adjust these approaches to the situation and the culture. I usually avoid telling survivors that we provide psychotherapy, counseling, because first of all, they may not be sure what it means personally for them. And also it comes with a stigma. I usually tell them that we help to cope with stresses, but there might be different ideas as well. I get a lot of questions. How do you explain about the benefits of psychotherapy? I don't. I'm just telling them it might help them to cope with stresses. But sometimes I do. So general expertise in trauma work, it's not enough for disaster work. It has very special framework and special PFA training is needed, and that's what we are doing now. Also, any humanitarian research is extremely tempting in this situation, but it needs to be vetted by the ethical review board because our populations are extremely vulnerable, and not just any ethical review board, but those who have expertise in humanitarian research. The needs assessment can be done without vetting. It does not require it. But as I wrote in my several papers, it still can open a Pandora box, and there might be a lot of ethical concerns. Now, self-awareness. In my work that was published recently about responding to the psychological needs of health workers during pandemic, 10 lessons from humanitarian work, I proposed to replace the self-care with self-awareness. Self-care, especially in the disaster side, is associated with a lot of kind of negative connotations. So if you care for yourself, it means that others have to take your work on. Also, person might feel guilty, and so on and so on. Instead, self-awareness, professional self-awareness allows us to examine ourselves, to know our resources, and to know when we have to stop, not because our professional board are telling us, but because we are professionals and we know when we are no longer able to help. So that is why self-awareness seems like calm with less stigma. And there are a few things with this regard. Self-awareness helps us to recognize and address fantasies. And the most common are rescue fantasy, which is a belief that one must rescue or save another person from something bad. Very commonly, adopting this fantasy can lead to boundaries violation. So that because we seems like we are charged with a rescue mission, whether our client wants it or not, and we may want to do that against their will. There is also the Superman complex, which is a fantasy based on the belief that Superman is the only one who can save the problem and no one else. And you are the best out of that. Is that the problem there is that the Superman always works alone. They are not team players, and it's not acceptable for the disaster work. And there is also the helper's fantasy, which involves expecting appreciation and gratitude for our work. It may come or may not. More often than not, we see people that are angry, and it can lead to the burnout and kind of, feeling that we are not making difference. It's not the case. To help to overcome this fantasy, we first need to recognize it. And also we need to understand that we are doing this work not for them. We are doing this work for ourselves because it's our mission. And that makes us feel better about our kind of, destiny, about our life choices, and about our morale, and kind of, basically about our role in life. A lot of people find it much more rewarding than just, depending on thank you from the people that we helped and whom we will never see again. We also, self-awareness kind of, helps us to understand the importance of peer support. So again, we cannot do this work alone. We are very easily losing the, grip on the reality and the need with the supervision. And here are some additional resources that I was referring to. This resource that comes from the MHPSS and Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Network. You see here very small signs that also have circles of different colors. They come with a lot of different languages, and their resources are filling up very quickly, and the translation happens all the time. So that's was most of I wanted to say. Of course, there is much more to that, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Please feel free to make your comments and questions and disagreements under this video. But generally, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your interest and kind of, your interest in helping people who are in a great need of mental health supports. And I wish you all the best. Thank you very much and have a nice day.